My name is Kendall Griffin. I'm 31, and for 8 years my family used me as their full-time unpaid babysitter. Friday night, right in the middle of dinner, my brother looked at me with that smug grin and said, "If you want to keep living here, you'll start paying rent. $900 a month starting now." Shelby nearly spat out her wine laughing. Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad just kept cutting his steak. Dead silence. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just smiled. The first real smile I'd felt in forever stood up and said calmly, "Thanks for the reminder." I walked to my room, threw my things into a bag, and left. No drama, no goodbye. I rolled the suitcase past the table, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cool Indianapolis night. Devin shouted after me, "You're really walking out over rent." I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove away. 2 weeks later, my brother sent a text that made me laugh harder than I had in years. Before I tell you what it said, smash that like button, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because what happened next destroyed everything they thought they had. Let's go back to how it all started. To understand why I just smiled and walked out that night without a single argument, you have to go back 8 years and see how everything started. It began the week my niece Oakley was born. My brother Devin, who's 35 now, and his wife Shelby brought her home from the hospital, and suddenly my parents turned to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. My father Larry and my mother Teresa sat me down after dinner and said they needed help, because Devin had just started a new sales job with crazy hours and Shelby was recovering from a rough delivery. They promised it would only be for a few weeks until they got into a routine. I was 23, fresh out of college, working entry-level accounting downtown Indianapolis, and still living at home in Fishers to save money, so I agreed. A few weeks turned into months. Then months turned into years. When Colton came along 4 years ago, the arrangement simply doubled. I became the person who left work early to pick Oakley up from kindergarten, the one who stayed home when Colton had an ear infection, the one who canceled everything whenever Shelby decided she needed a girls' night, or Devin had a work dinner he couldn't miss. My schedule revolved around theirs, and nobody ever asked if that was okay. I still remember my 25th birthday. I had finally worked up the courage to accept a date with a guy from the office who seemed genuinely nice. We had reservations at a little Italian place on Mass Ave. An hour before he was supposed to pick me up, Shelby called crying that Colton had a fever, and she couldn't miss her yoga class because the instructor was subbing out the next week. Mom got on the phone right after and said, "Honey, family comes first, you know that. You're so good with the kids." The guy never asked me out again. Another time, 3 years ago, I had planned a weekend trip to Chicago with 2 college friends I hadn't seen in forever. Tickets were bought, hotel booked. The night before we were supposed to leave, Devin texted that he and Shelby had surprise concert tickets and needed me to watch both kids overnight. When I said I already had plans, Mom looked at me like I'd slapped her and said Devin worked so hard and deserved a break. I canceled the trip. My friends stopped inviting me after that. The worst was the night I ran a 102-degree fever. I was shaking under 3 blankets, barely able to stand, but Shelby called at 2 in the morning because Colton wouldn't stop crying and she had an early meeting. Devin was out of town for work. Mom came to my door, handed me the car keys, and told me the daycare emergency contact was still listed as me anyway, so I was the only one who could pick him up if they closed early the next day. I drove 25 minutes each way in February. With the heater broken, picked Colton up, brought him home, gave him medicine, and sat on the bathroom floor until the fever broke for both of us. Nobody checked on me the next day. Whenever I tried to bring it up, the response was always the same. Dad would say I was the reliable one, the strong one, the one who didn't have a family of her own yet, so I had the time. Mom would add that Devin and Shelby were building their future and needed support, and blood helps blood. They made it sound like I was lucky to be useful. Meanwhile, I was paying for half the groceries, covering the streaming services everyone used, buying the kids' clothes, whenever Shelby decided they'd outgrown everything overnight, and still putting whatever was left into a savings account that barely grew because something always came up. 8 years of that life. 8 years of being the built-in solution to every problem my brother's family had, and not once did anyone ask what I wanted. That's why when Devin dropped his little rent bomb at the dinner table, something inside me just clicked into place. I didn't need to fight anymore. I didn't need to explain. I already knew exactly where I stood, and for the first time in almost a decade, I was completely okay with walking away from all of it. That Friday night was the final drop that made the cup overflow. We were all sitting around the big oak table in the dining room, the one Mom still sets with the good plates, even when it's just the six of us. Devin had just finished bragging about some deal he closed at work, and how he was finally in line for the regional position everyone had been talking about for months. Shelby kept touching his arm, laughing too loud at everything he said, while Oakley colored on her placemat, and Colton banged his spoon against his sippy cup. Then, Devin put his fork down, looked straight across the table at me, and dropped the bomb like he was asking me to pass the salt. So starting next month, you're paying rent if you want to keep your room. $900. Cash or Venmo doesn't matter to me. Shelby let out this sharp little laugh through her nose and covered her mouth like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all week. Dad nodded slowly, eyes on his plate, chewing the same piece of chicken he'd been working on for 5 minutes. Mom reached for the water pitcher and refilled glasses that were already full. I felt the words hit me square in the chest, but instead of anger, something cold and clear washed over me. 8 years of canceled plans, missed birthdays, nights I never slept, because someone else needed something flashed behind my eyes in one clean second. I set my napkin down, pushed my chair back, and stood up. Devin raised an eyebrow. "What, you're not even going to discuss it?" I didn't answer. I walked down the hallway to my room, the same room I'd had since high school, the one with the faded posters still on the walls because I'd never had time to redecorate. I pulled the biggest duffel bag I owned from under the bed, opened drawers, and started putting in everything that actually belonged to me. Closed laptop, the external hard drive with my photos, the sketchbooks I hadn't touched in years, the small jewelry box Mom gave me when I graduated college. It took less than 10 minutes. Most of what was in that room had been bought for the kids, or replaced so many times I couldn't remember what was originally mine. When the bag was full, I zipped it, slung it over my shoulder, and walked back through the dining room. Conversation had stopped. 5 pairs of eyes followed me. Oakley looked confused. Colton kept banging his spoon. I stopped at the doorway, turned around once, and gave them the calmest smile I could manage. Devin snorted. "Come on, Kendall, sit down. We're all adults here." I opened the front door, stepped onto the porch, and pulled it closed behind me without slamming it. The night air felt colder than usual for early fall in Indiana, but it tasted clean. I threw the duffel in the back seat of my car, slid behind the wheel, and drove. 40 minutes later, I was checking into a Super 8 just off I-69 on the north side of Indianapolis. The clerk barely looked up from his phone when he handed me the key card. Room 212 smelled like old cigarettes and cheap air freshener, but the second I locked the door and leaned against it, I realized something I hadn't felt in almost a decade. Silence. No crying baby down the hall. No Shelby yelling that someone needed to run to Target for more diapers. No Devin asking where his work shirts were. Just the hum of the ice machine outside and the distant sound of semis on the highway. I sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, shoes still on, and waited for the tears or the panic or the guilt that I was sure would come. Nothing happened. My phone stayed dark because I'd turned it off the second I got in the car. For the first time since Oakley was born, I fell asleep before midnight, and no one woke me up at 3 in the morning because a kid had a nightmare, or needed water, or threw up on the carpet. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight coming through the thin curtains, and for a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered, and the feeling that rushed through me wasn't fear. It was relief so strong it almost hurt. 10 days after I disappeared from the house, I signed the lease on a tiny studio in Broad Ripple the very next Saturday morning. It was the third place I looked at, 450 square feet above a record store, exposed brick walls, one huge window that faced the Monon Trail, and a fire escape that doubled as my balcony. The landlord didn't ask too many questions once he saw I had steady employment and could pay first and last month up front. By Sunday night, I had the keys in my hand and the first real address that was completely mine. Monday rolled around and I walked into the office like nothing had changed on the outside. Same cubicle on the third floor downtown, same coffee stain on the carpet by the printer, same morning stand-up meeting. Except people noticed something different almost immediately. My team lead asked if I'd gotten a new haircut. The woman who sits across from me said my skin looked brighter and asked what products I was using. Someone else joked that I finally looked like I'd slept more than 4 hours. They weren't wrong. For 10 straight nights, I had slept until my body decided to wake up, not because a child was screaming, or Shelby was banging on my door because she couldn't find Colton's left shoe. I kept my phone powered off the entire time. Not on silent, not on do not disturb, completely off. 10 days without a single notification, without hearing that familiar buzz that always meant someone needed something right now. No last-minute daycare pickups. No requests to swing by the grocery store on my way home from work. No texts asking if I could watch the kids so Devin could take Shelby to some new rooftop bar. Just quiet. With the extra hours in my day, I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I wandered the weekend farmers market on Broad Ripple Avenue and bought fresh flowers just because they smelled good. I found a secondhand shop 2 blocks away and picked up a used couch for $200, a coffee table someone had painted teal, and a set of mismatched lamps that actually worked. I spent an entire Saturday rolling pale sage paint onto the brick wall while listening to whatever music I wanted at full volume. No one complained. No one asked me to turn it down because the baby was napping. The best discovery was the oversized sketch pad I found buried in one of the boxes I'd brought from the old house. I used to draw all the time in college, little charcoal cityscapes and watercolor portraits, but somewhere along the way I stopped. That first Wednesday night after work, I sat cross-legged on the floor with a cheap set of pencils and started sketching the view from my fire escape, the trail lights flickering on at dusk, people walking dogs, runners with headphones, the canal reflecting the last bit of sunset. My hand remembered what to do faster than my brain did. By the time I looked up, it was after midnight, and I had 3 finished pages I didn't hate. I cooked real meals for one person instead of throwing together whatever would feed 6 on a random Tuesday. I learned that I actually like salmon when it isn't drowned in ketchup for the kids. I bought the good coffee beans and stopped drinking whatever was left in the pot at the old house. I took long showers without anyone pounding on the door asking if I'd seen the iPad charger. I read entire books in one sitting on the couch with all the windows open and the trail noise drifting up like background music. For the first time since I was 23, I wasn't waiting for the next emergency. My time belonged to me, and only me, and the feeling was so foreign I caught myself smiling at random moments like an idiot, standing in the middle of the cereal aisle or waiting for the crosswalk light to change. 10 days of owning every minute of my life, and I already knew I was never going back to the way things were. On the 11th day, I finally turned my phone back on. The second the screen lit up, it started vibrating so hard I almost dropped it. 187 missed calls, 432 text messages, 17 voicemails, all from the same 4 numbers. I sat on the floor of my studio back against the freshly painted wall and started scrolling. Mom had sent 38 messages that first night alone. They began with, "Where are you? And this isn't funny." Kendall and quickly turned into "Your father is worried sick," and Oakley keeps asking why Aunt Kendall left. By day 3, they were just strings of crying emojis and single words like please. Shelby filled 2 entire threads with photos and videos of Colton crying in his crib, holding his stuffed dinosaur, asking when I was coming home to read him his bedtime story. One message just said, "He hasn't slept through the night since you left. This is on you." Another came at 2 in the morning. "He threw up from crying so hard. Hope you're happy with your little dramatic exit." Devin's texts were shorter and angrier. The first one, sent 20 minutes after I walked out, read, "Real mature. Storming off like a teenager. By the next afternoon, you're seriously doing this over $900 day 4. He tried the reasonable approach. "Look, we can talk about the rent thing. Just come home." When that didn't work, he switched to guilt. "Dad's blood pressure is through the roof because of you." By day 8, the mask was completely off. "You're selfish. Always have been. Hope your freedom is worth destroying your family." I read every single one without answering. The voicemails were worse. Shelby left 6 in a row, voice cracking, telling me the kids were confused and scared and that I was breaking their hearts. Mom left one long, rambling message that ended with her sobbing so hard I couldn't understand the last 30 seconds. Devin left exactly one voicemail, his voice low and cold. "You think you're teaching us a lesson? Wait until you need something. You'll come crawling back and we'll see how fast we forget this." I let the phone charge fully while I made coffee and stared out the window at the trail. People were walking dogs, pushing strollers, living lives that didn't revolve around my availability. When it hit 100%, I opened Devin's thread first because his anger was easiest to face. I typed 6 words and hit send before I could second-guess myself. "I'm safe. Stop contacting me. Nothing else." No explanation, no apology, no promise to talk later. The 3 dots appeared instantly, then vanished, then appeared again. My phone started ringing. Devin. I declined the call. It rang again. Shelby this time. Declined. Mom. Declined. Then the texts started pouring in faster than I could read them. Devin. "That's it. That's all you have to say, Shelby. You're really going to do this to the kids? Mom, honey, please just tell us you're okay." I turned the volume off and opened the settings. One by one, I blocked every number that had spent the last 10 days trying to drag me back. Devin first, then Shelby, then Mom, then Dad, even though he'd never texted once. When the last one was done, the screen finally went quiet. I stood up, walked to the fire escape and opened the window. The October air was crisp and smelled like fallen leaves. For the first time in longer than I could remember, no one knew exactly where I was, and no one could reach me unless I let them. The power of that silence settled over me like the warmest blanket I'd ever owned. I left the phone on the counter face down and went back to my sketch pad. The trail was busy with Saturday runners and the light was perfect. I had all afternoon and no one to answer to. 2 weeks after the day I left, Devin found my new address. I was coming back from the corner market with a bag of groceries when I saw his black SUV parked crooked across 2 spaces in front of my building. He was leaning against the driver's door, arms crossed, staring at the entrance like he'd been waiting for hours. The second he spotted me, his face twisted into something between anger and relief, and he pushed off the car. I kept walking at the same pace. No running, no hiding. When I reached the steps, he moved to block me. "How the hell did you even pay for this place?" were the first words out of his mouth. I shifted the grocery bag to my other arm and looked him straight in the eye. "That's not your business anymore." He laughed, but it came out forced and loud enough that a couple walking their dog glanced over. "Not my business. You disappear for 2 weeks. Scare the shit out of Mom. Let Shelby deal with 2 screaming kids alone, and now it's not my business." I took one step closer so the people on the sidewalk wouldn't hear every word. "Move." Instead, he planted himself wider. "You're coming home. Get in the car." "I'm not asking." I set the bag down on the bottom step, pulled my phone from my pocket, and opened the keypad to 911. My thumb hovered over the call button. Devin's eyes flicked to the screen and something in his expression faltered, but he doubled down. You think you can survive out here by yourself? You think you're tough now? Come home. I won't even bring up the rent again. We'll forget this whole thing happened. I pressed the button so the emergency tone started beeping loud and unmistakable. His face went white. Kendall, stop. Leave or I finish the call. Your choice. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the person standing in front of him. For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't try to make him feel better. I just waited. You're really doing this, he said, voice cracking on the last word. You're throwing your whole family away. No, I answered calm and clear. I'm keeping myself. A neighbor came out of the building, saw the scene, and slowed down. Devin noticed the audience, and the fight drained out of him all at once. He took one step back, then another, hands raised like I was the one who'd cornered him. You're going to regret this, he muttered, but it sounded weak even to him. He got in the SUV, slammed the door hard enough to rock the vehicle, and peeled out without looking back. I stood on the sidewalk until his taillights disappeared around the corner. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was the same rush I used to get right before a big presentation at work, the moment everything clicks into place, and you've got it. I picked up my groceries, climbed the stairs to my studio, and locked the door behind me. For a minute, I leaned against it, listening to the quiet that was now mine to keep. Then I unpacked the food-made dinner and ate it on the fire escape while the sun went down over the trail. Devin never showed up again. 1 month later, everything in the old house completely fell apart. The first hired nanny lasted exactly 5 days. She was a college student who thought watching 2 kids would be easy money. By Wednesday, she was texting Shelby that Colton had bitten her twice, and Oakley refused to listen to anyone who wasn't me. On Friday, she quit without notice and blocked their numbers. The second one never even showed up after reading the online reviews the first girl left. Without anyone to watch the kids, Devin and Shelby tried juggling everything themselves. The house turned into chaos within a week. Dishes piled so high the sink disappeared. Laundry overflowed every basket until it spilled onto the hallway floor. The playroom looked like a tornado had hit it, toys everywhere, old food stuck to the carpet. They finally called a professional cleaning service that charged $350 just to make the place livable again, and the crew told them it was one of the worst houses they had seen all year. Devin's job was the next thing to crack. He had been the top candidate for the regional sales position everyone knew came with a 40% raise and a company car. The final interview required proof he could travel overnight twice a month and work late when needed. With no reliable childcare, he had to turn down every last-minute trip and leave early 3 days a week to pick the kids up from daycare. His boss sent a polite email withdrawing the offer and gave the promotion to someone else. Shelby hit her limit the same week. She packed 2 suitcases, took the kids to her parents' house in Carmel, and told Devin she was filing for separation. She said she never signed up to be a single mother while he chased a job that no longer existed. The last time I heard anything about them, she was meeting with a divorce attorney, and Devin was sleeping on the couch in the living room because he couldn't face the empty master bedroom. 2 months to the day after I walked out, a new number appeared on my phone with a text that stopped me in the middle of the grocery store. Kendall. The company just pulled the regional promotion because I can't keep stable hours anymore. Shelby is filing for divorce. I'm sorry. Come home. I won't ask for rent ever again. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed 8 words, hit send, and blocked the number forever. I stopped being your solution a long time ago. That was the last message I ever sent any of them. Today, I'm still in the same little studio in Broad Ripple. My savings account is growing for the first time in 8 years. I eat dinner on the fire escape when the weather is nice, and sketch the canal until the streetlights come on. I take weekend trips whenever I want. I sleep through the night. I finally bought the good watercolor set I always wanted and signed up for an evening art class at the local community center. My life is quiet, simple, and completely mine. Being needed is not the same as being loved. When you stop being useful, you finally see who actually cared about you and who only cared about what you could do for them. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I learned it completely. If you've ever felt like the family doormat, know that walking away isn't selfish, it's survival. And on the other side of that door is a life that belongs only to you. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If anything here hit close to home, please share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Like, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.